The twin suns of Thalos 7 burned overhead like angry eyes. Red dust covered everything on this miserable mining world. Taman wiped the sweat from his forehead and checked his cargo manifest one more time. 15 containers of processed minerals, all accounted for. Another delivery complete. Another day closer to earning enough credits to get off this rock and find something better. His transport rumbled along the perimeter road, kicking up clouds of rust-colored dust behind it. The vehicle was old, dented, and made strange noises, but it ran. That was all that mattered. Taman had learned not to expect much from life. Keep your head down, do the work, collect your pay. Simple rules for a simple life. The Velkari breeding compound passed by on his left. Taman had delivered supplies there before. The lizard-like aliens who ran the mining operations on Thalos 7 kept to themselves mostly. They were efficient workers, excellent engineers, and they paid on time. That made them better than half the species Taman dealt with in his hauling business. Something pinged on his scanner. A life sign, faint and weak, just off the road ahead. Taman frowned. Probably a desert scavenger looking for scraps near the compound. He should just drive past. Getting involved in local wildlife situations was a good way to waste time and credits. But the signal was so small, so weak. Taman cursed under his breath and slowed the transport. He told himself he would just take a quick look. Confirm it was some animal, then move on. 5 minutes, no more. He stopped the vehicle and climbed down from the cab. The heat hit him immediately, even through his work clothes. The suns were reaching their peak position in the sky. Not a good time to be outside without proper gear. Taman walked toward the signal, his boots crunching on the hard-packed dirt. He pulled out his handheld scanner, following the fading blip on the screen. 20 meters, 1510. Then he saw it. At first, Taman thought it might be a discarded piece of white plastic or a reflective tarp. But as he got closer, he realized it was moving. Barely moving. Just the faintest rise and fall, but definitely alive. It was a Velkari hatchling. Taman had never seen one up close before. The Velkari kept their young hidden away in the breeding compounds, away from outsider eyes. This one was tiny, no bigger than a house cat. Its scales were pure white, almost translucent in the harsh sunlight. Completely different from the dark green and brown scales of adult Velkari, the hatchling lay motionless in the dust, its small chest moving in shallow, rapid breaths. Its eyes were closed. Taman knelt beside it, careful not to cast a shadow that might startle it. Up close, he could see the creature was in bad shape. Its white scales were dull and cracked from dehydration. Its small limbs were drawn up tight against its body. Why would a hatchling be out here alone in the desert? Taman looked back toward the breeding compound. The walls were high and smooth, designed to keep things in. Or to keep things out. There were no gates on this side, no openings. Someone had deliberately brought this hatchling out here and left it. A cold feeling settled in Taman's stomach. He had heard stories about some alien species abandoning offspring they considered defective or weak. He had always hoped those stories were exaggerations. Apparently not. The hatchling's breathing became even more shallow. It was dying. Right here, right now. This small creature was dying in the dust while the compound that should protect it stood silent behind its walls. Taman should walk away. He knew that. The Velkari had their own culture, their own ways. Humans had only been allowed to operate in this sector for 5 years. The alliance was new, fragile. Interfering with Velkari customs could cause problems. Big problems. The kind that ended careers and closed trade routes. But the hatchling made a sound. Just a tiny weak chirp. The sound of something that wanted to live. Taman made his decision. He pulled off his work jacket and wrapped it carefully around the small body. The hatchling was surprisingly light, its bones delicate beneath the scales. It made that small sound again, barely audible. Taman held it against his chest, trying to share his body heat while not crushing it. He walked quickly back to his transport, scanning the compound walls for any sign that someone was watching. The Velkari had cameras everywhere in their facilities. Surely someone would see him. Surely someone would stop him. No one came. Taman climbed into the cab of his transport, still cradling the hatchling. He set it down gently on the passenger seat and grabbed his emergency kit from behind the seat. Inside was a thermal blanket, meant for human emergencies in cold environments. He spread it out and carefully placed the hatchling on top of it, then wrapped the edges around the small body. The transport had climate control at least. Taman cranked the temperature up and directed the vents toward the passenger seat. He had no idea what temperature Velkari preferred, but anything was better than the killing heat outside. Now came the hard part. Where could he take it? The nearest human outpost was 2 hours away. He had no medical training. He knew nothing about Velkari biology. The smart thing would be to drive to the compound entrance and hand the hatchling over to the authorities there. But they had left it to die. They knew it was out there, dying in the sun, and they had done nothing. Taemin put the transport in gear and turned toward the human outpost. He would figure out the rest later. Right now, the hatchling needed help, and he was the only one around to provide it. As he drove, he kept glancing at the small bundle on the seat beside him. The thermal blanket had sensors that displayed the temperature inside. The hatchling's body heat was rising slowly. That was good, right? Or was it bad? Taemin had no idea. "Just hang on," he said quietly. "We will get you some help. Just hang on a little longer." The hatchling's eyes opened for just a moment. They were a pale, milky blue, nothing like the yellow or orange eyes of adult Velkari. They looked at Taemin without comprehension, just a brief moment of awareness before closing again. Taemin pressed down on the accelerator. The transport's engine whined in protest, but it picked up speed. Red dust flew past the windows. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. In his communicator, a message notification blinked. Probably his dispatcher, Hyunwoo, wondering where he was. Taemin was supposed to report in after every delivery. He ignored it. He would deal with the questions later. Right now, he had a more important job. He had saved countless shipments of cargo from damage during his years as a hauler. He had transported precious equipment, valuable minerals, and fragile components across dozens of worlds. He had never lost a shipment. He was not about to lose this one. The hatchling's breathing seemed a bit stronger now, or maybe that was just wishful thinking. Taemin adjusted the climate control again and focused on the road ahead. The human outpost appeared in the distance, a cluster of gray buildings against the red landscape. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences came from this decision, Taemin knew he had made the right choice. Some things were more important than contracts and alliances. Some things were more important than keeping quiet and staying out of trouble. Sometimes the right thing to do was to just stop and help. The medical bay doors slid open with a hiss. Dr. Jiwon looked up from her computer terminal, her expression shifting from curiosity to alarm in an instant. Taemin stood in the doorway, still holding the thermal blanket wrapped around the small Velkari hatchling. "Please tell me that is not what I think it is," Jiwon said slowly. "I found it dying in the desert," Taemin replied. "It needs help." Jiwon stood up and walked around her desk, her eyes fixed on the bundle in his arms. She was a small woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Right now, those eyes were filled with concern and something that might have been anger. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" she asked quietly. "I saved a life," Taemin said. "You stole a Velkari hatchling from their breeding compound. I found it abandoned in the desert. There is a difference." Jiwon took a deep breath and pointed to the examination table. "Put it down, gently." Taemin placed the hatchling on the padded surface and carefully unwrapped the thermal blanket. In the bright lights of the medical bay, the creature looked even more fragile. Its white scales seemed almost transparent, revealing the delicate network of blood vessels beneath. Its chest rose and fell in quick, shallow movements. Jiwon pulled on a pair of examination gloves and leaned over the hatchling. Her fingers moved carefully over the small body, checking for injuries. "Body temperature is too low," she muttered. "Severe dehydration, malnutrition. How long was it out there?" "I do not know," Taemin admitted. "I just found it." "And you just decided to bring it here to my medical bay without thinking about the consequences. What was I supposed to do? Let it die?" Jiwon looked at him for a long moment. Then she sighed and turned back to the hatchling. "I need to run some scans. I need to figure out what this creature needs to survive. But Taemin, I need you to understand something. I am a human doctor. I know human biology. I have basic training in some common alien species. But Velkari? They are very private about their medical information. Our database has almost nothing useful. Can you save it? I can try. But I am going to need help, real help, from people who know what they are doing." She moved to her computer and began typing rapidly. "I am sending out requests to every xenobiologist I know. Someone out there must have information on Velkari hatchling care." While Jiwon worked, Taemin stayed beside the examination table. The hatchling's eyes remained closed. Its breathing seemed to be getting worse, not better. Panic started to rise in his chest. What if bringing it here had been a mistake? What if the stress of the journey had made things worse? Talk to me, Ji-won said without looking up from her computer.
Keep talking.
It might help if it hears voices. Some species respond to auditory stimulation. Taemin felt foolish, but he started talking anyway. He told the hatchling about his transport, about the deliveries he made, about the red dust of Thalos 7. He told it about the stars he had seen from different worlds, about the taste of fresh water after a long day in the desert heat. The hatchling's breathing steadied slightly. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was the vocal stimulation. Either way, Taemin kept talking. The door to the medical bay opened again. Captain Yoonji walked in, her uniform crisp despite the late hour. She was the commander of the human outpost, a career military officer who had seen action in 3 conflicts before taking this assignment. Nothing rattled her, until now. "Someone want to tell me why I just received a formal complaint from the Velkari Breeding Council?" she asked. Ji-won and Taemin exchanged glances. "That was fast. Too fast. They are demanding we return their property immediately," Yoonji continued. She walked over to the examination table and looked down at the hatchling. Her expression softened for just a moment before the professional mask returned. "They are calling it a defective specimen that was humanely removed from the breeding population." Humanely? Taemin felt anger rising in his voice. They left it to die in the desert. There was nothing humane about it. "That is their cultural practice," Yoonji said. "Albino hatchlings are considered genetic defects. They believe it is merciful to let them die quickly rather than allow them to suffer." "It is still alive," Ji-won said quietly. "It is fighting to survive. That does not look like suffering to me. That looks like a creature that wants to live." Yoonji rubbed her temples. "I need to report this up the chain of command. The alliance with the Velkari is important. We have trade agreements, mining contracts, shared defense protocols. If we refuse to return the hatchling, there could be serious consequences." "And if we do return it?" Taemin asked. "What happens then?" No one answered. They all knew what would happen. "Give me 24 hours, Ji-won said. "Let me try to stabilize it. Let me gather information. If it dies on its own, the problem solves itself. If it lives, then we can make decisions based on facts instead of panic." Yoonji considered this. Finally, she nodded. 24 hours. But after that, this goes above my pay grade. Understood? Understood, Ji-won replied. The captain left and Ji-won returned to her work. Responses started coming in from her queries. Most were unhelpful. Velkari biology was poorly documented in human databases. But one message stood out. A xenobiologist from the research station on Kepler 452 had studied Velkari thermal regulation. She provided detailed instructions on maintaining proper body temperature for hatchlings. Ji-won set up a specialized heating pad and adjusted the room's climate controls. She prepared a nutrient solution based on the limited information available and used a small tube to get fluids into the hatchling's system. It was delicate work, requiring patience and steady hands. Hours passed. Taemin refused to leave. He sat in a chair next to the examination table, occasionally reaching out to touch the hatchling's small foot with one finger. The scales felt cool and smooth like polished stone. "Why did you do it?" Ji-won asked during a quiet moment. "Really, why did you stop?" Taemin thought about it. "I do not know. I saw something suffering and I could not just drive away. Does there need to be a better reason than that?" "Most people would have driven away," Ji-won said. "Most people would have convinced themselves it was not their problem. Maybe I am not most people. Apparently not." As the night wore on, the hatchling's condition slowly improved. Its breathing became deeper and more regular. Its body temperature stabilized. The color of its scales brightened slightly, losing some of that dull, lifeless quality. Then, around 3 in the morning, something remarkable happened. The hatchling's eyes opened. They were still that strange pale blue, but now they were clear and focused. They looked around the medical bay with obvious curiosity, taking in the lights, the equipment, the strange surroundings. Then those eyes found Taemin. The hatchling stared at him. Really stared, with an intensity that seemed impossible for something so young. Its small mouth opened and it made a sound. Not the weak chirp from earlier, but something stronger. Something that sounded almost like a word. "Is it trying to communicate?" Taemin whispered. Ji-won moved closer, her scanner active. "Heart rate is increasing. Brain activity is spiking. I have never seen anything like this. It is like its entire neurological system just activated at once. The hatchling kept staring at Taemin. It made the sound again, more insistent this time. I think, Ji-won said slowly, it might have imprinted on you. What does that mean? Some species form an immediate bond with the first being they see after hatching, or after a near-death experience. It is a survival mechanism. The hatchling identifies a protector and bonds with them. She checked her scanner readings again. If that is what just happened, this situation just got a lot more complicated. Why? Because in Valkyrie culture, the imprint bond is sacred. It is one of their most fundamental biological processes. If this hatchling has truly bonded with you, separating you could cause severe psychological damage, maybe even death. Taemin looked at the small creature still watching him with those intense eyes. He had thought saving it would be simple. Find it, bring it to medical, let the professionals handle it. But nothing about this was simple. The hatchling reached out one small clawed hand toward him. Without thinking, Taemin extended his finger. The hatchling wrapped its tiny digits around it and held on tight. In that moment, Taemin knew his life had just changed forever. This was not just about saving a life anymore. This was about responsibility. This was about standing up for something that could not stand up for itself. What do we do now? He asked quietly. Ji-won smiled, a tired but genuine smile. Now we figure out how to keep both of you alive, together. Outside the medical bay, the first sun began to rise over Thelos 7, painting the red dust gold. 6 months changed everything. Taemin stood in the cargo bay of his modified transport, watching Velshir practice with the mechanical components. The hatchling had grown. He was now the size of a large dog, his white scales developing an unexpected shimmer that caught the light like mother of pearl. Beautiful and strange, nothing like the dull browns and greens of other Valkyrie. Try the blue wire to the left connector, Taemin suggested. Velshir's head tilted, considering. His long fingers, more dexterous than any human hand, made the connection. The small engine they were working on hummed to life. The young Valkyrie made a pleased chirping sound and looked at Taemin for approval. Perfect, Taemin said with a smile. You are getting better at this every day. The words came out in basic human standard, but Taemin knew Velshir understood. Over the past months, the young Valkyrie had learned to comprehend human speech with remarkable speed. Speaking it was harder. Valkyrie vocal structures were different, designed for hissing and clicking sounds. But Velshir was trying, and that mattered more than perfection. The transport had become their home. Taemin had rebuilt the cargo area, installing a climate-controlled living space for Velshir. Temperature regulation was crucial for Valkyrie health, especially for an albino. Too hot or too cold could be dangerous. The system cost most of Taemin's savings, but it worked. They traveled the trade routes together now, an unusual pair that attracted attention at every stop. Most people were curious. Some were supportive. Others gave them hostile looks and whispered among themselves. The Valkyrie community in particular seemed divided. Some saw Velshir as an abomination that should have died. Others looked at him with something that might have been shame or regret. Taemin tried not to care what others thought. His job was to keep Velshir safe, healthy, and happy. Everything else was just noise. The communicator on the wall beeped. Taemin pressed the button. Yes? We have arrived at Station Harmony, the docking controller's voice announced. Bay 17 is ready when you are. Acknowledged. We will be out in 10 minutes. Station Harmony was a neutral trading hub, a massive structure that orbited between 3 solar systems. Dozens of species came here to trade, negotiate, and share information. It was also where they were scheduled to meet someone important. Come on, Taemin said to Velshir. We need to get ready. Velshir followed him to the small living area. The young Valkyrie had learned to dress in a protective suit when visiting stations. His albinism made him vulnerable to certain types of light, and the suit's filters protected his sensitive skin and eyes. It also had the benefit of hiding his appearance, which reduced problems when they traveled through areas with strong Valkyrie populations. They walked through the station together, Taemin leading and Velshir staying close behind. The young Valkyrie's head turned constantly, taking in all the sights and sounds. His curiosity was endless. Everything was new, everything was fascinating. Dr. Da-un was waiting for them at a small cafe in the commercial district. She was younger than Taemin had expected, maybe in her late 20s with bright eyes and an eager expression. She stood up when she saw them approach. Taemin? She asked. And this must be Velshir. They sat down and Daun immediately pulled out a data pad. I have been researching Velkari history for the past 3 years, she explained. When I heard about your situation, I knew I had to contact you. What I have found is remarkable. You said you had information about Albino Velkari, Taman prompted. More than information. I have proof that everything the Velkari breeding councils teach about albinos is wrong. Daun's fingers flew across the data pad. Look at this. These are documents from Velkari archives over 1,000 years old, before the breeding councils took power. The screen showed images of ancient Velkari art and writing. Many of the figures depicted had pale or white scales. They were shown in positions of honor, wearing ceremonial robes, surrounded by others who seemed to be listening or learning from them. Albino Velkari were not always rejected, Daun continued. In fact, they were revered. They were called light-bringers and served as spiritual leaders, teachers, and mediators. Historical texts describe them as having enhanced empathic abilities and superior cognitive functions. Taman leaned forward, studying the images. What changed? A cultural revolution. About 900 years ago, the breeding councils rose to power. They promoted a philosophy of genetic purity and strength through standardization. Albinos were reclassified as defects. Within 2 generations, they had nearly eliminated them from the population. Velshire had been quiet during the conversation, but now he leaned forward to look at the images. His pale blue eyes reflected the screen's glow. He touched the datapad gently with one clawed finger, tracing the outline of an ancient albino Velkari. There is more, Daun said. I tested some of the historical claims. The enhanced cognitive abilities? They appear to be real. Albino Velkari have different brain structures, more connections between certain neural centers. If raised properly, they could theoretically process information faster and more creatively than standard Velkari. Why would the breeding councils hide this? Taman asked. Control, Daun replied simply. The old Lightbringers challenged authority. They encouraged questioning and independent thought. The breeding councils wanted obedience and conformity. Albinos threatened that order. Taman felt anger building in his chest. So they just eliminated them? Condemned innocent hatchlings to death because they might grow up to think differently? Welcome to the uglier side of galactic politics, Daun said grimly. But here is the thing. The councils did not completely succeed. My research suggests there are other albino Velkari out there, hidden away, raised in secret by parents who could not follow through with abandonment. They are scattered across dozens of worlds, living in shadows. Velshire made a soft sound, something between a chirp and a hum. Taman had learned to recognize that as the noise he made when processing complex thoughts. Why are you telling us this? Taman asked. Because Velshire is not hiding, Daun said, looking directly at the young Velkari. He is visible. He is alive and growing stronger every day. He is proof that the breeding councils are wrong, and that scares them. As if summoning them through conversation, Taman's communicator beeped. He checked the message and his expression hardened. Speaking of the councils, the message was from Captain Yunji. The Velkari Breeding Council had filed formal charges against Taman for cultural interference and theft of Velkari property. They were demanding he appear before a tribunal. They were threatening to terminate trade agreements with human-controlled systems if the matter was not resolved. They are escalating, Daun observed, reading over his shoulder. They want to make an example of you. Let them try, Taman said quietly. He looked at Velshire, who was still studying the ancient images on the datapad. The young Velkari had every right to exist, to grow, to become whatever he was capable of becoming. No council, no tradition, no ancient law would convince Taman otherwise. Over the following weeks, the pressure increased. Human authorities contacted Taman repeatedly, asking him to comply with the tribunal summons. Trade agreements were being strained. Economic consequences were threatened. The message was clear. One human and one hatchling were not worth galactic conflict. But something unexpected happened. Support started building. Other humans who had witnessed Taman and Velshire working together spoke up. Scientists interested in Daun's research added their voices. Even some Velkari, quietly and anonymously, sent messages of support. Captain Unji contacted Taman one evening, while he was teaching Velshire basic mathematics. You need to make a decision, she said. The tribunal is happening whether you attend or not. If you refuse to go, you will be declared in violation of galactic law. If you go and lose, they will take Velshir away. And if we go and win, that is a big if, Yunji warned. But if you could win, it would set a precedent. It would mean individuals have the right to act on conscience, even when it conflicts with cultural norms. Taimin looked at Velshir, who was solving a complex equation on his datapad. The young Velkari had progressed from basic addition to advanced algebra in just 2 months. His mind was extraordinary. We will go, Taimin decided. We will make them see what I see. We will make them understand that traditions are not more important than lives. Velshir looked up from his work. He reached out and placed his hand on Taimin's arm, a gesture of comfort he had learned from watching humans. His pale blue eyes met Taimin's and something passed between them. Understanding, trust, family. Whatever happened at the tribunal, they would face it together. The Neutral Council station was enormous. It orbited the diplomatic world of Concordia, a gleaming structure of metal and glass that housed representatives from every major species in the galaxy. This was where conflicts were resolved through words instead of weapons, where laws were debated and justice was supposedly served. Taimin felt very small standing in the Grand Hall. The tribunal chamber was circular, with seats rising in tiers around a central floor. Representatives from dozens of species filled the seats, watching with varying degrees of interest. At the front sat the 3 judges who would decide the case: a Metherian with crystalline skin, a Torvan with 4 arms and compound eyes, and a human woman with gray hair and a stern expression. The Velkari delegation sat on the left side. High Matron Sekthar led them, an imposing figure with dark green scales and eyes like chips of amber. She wore the traditional robes of the breeding council, marked with symbols of genetic purity and cultural preservation. On the right side sat Taimin's group. Captain Yunji in her military uniform, Dr. Ji-Wan with her medical credentials displayed, and Da-Yun clutching her research data. And Velshir, no longer hiding in a protective suit. He sat beside Taimin, his white scales catching the light from overhead fixtures, his pale blue eyes watching everything with calm intelligence. The human judge, whose nameplate identified her as Justice Quan, called the tribunal to order. We are here to consider charges of cultural interference brought by the Velkari Breeding Council against the human Taimin. High Matron Sekthar, you may present your case. Sekthar rose with fluid grace. When she spoke, her voice was measured and dignified. This tribunal exists to protect the cultural autonomy of all species. We do not interfere with how others raise their young, practice their religions, or structure their societies. This is fundamental to galactic peace. She gestured toward Velshir. 6 months ago, this human violated that principle. He removed a hatchling from Velkari territory without authorization. He interfered with a practice that has guided our people for 900 years. The hatchling in question carries a genetic defect. Our traditions, developed through centuries of careful breeding, require that such defects be removed from the population humanely and with minimal suffering. By leaving them to die in the desert? Captain Yunji interrupted. Justice Quan raised a hand. You will have your turn to speak, Captain. High Matron, continue. Sekthar's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained calm. Removal to natural environment allows defective hatchlings to return to the ecosystem peacefully. It is quick. It is natural. The alternative, raising them in a society where they cannot thrive, where their genetic abnormalities mark them as inferior, would be cruel. She brought up holographic displays showing genetic charts and population statistics. Albinism in Velkari is not merely a cosmetic difference. It correlates with reduced thermal regulation, vision problems, and structural weaknesses. Historically, albino Velkari who survived to adulthood lived shortened, difficult lives. Our practice protects our species from genetic degradation. The presentation was professional, well-organized, and compelling. Taimin felt a knot forming in his stomach. They had prepared for this, but hearing the arguments laid out so convincingly was still difficult. Sekthar concluded her opening statement. This human may have meant well, but good intentions do not excuse cultural imperialism. If we allow individuals to override the traditions of other species based on personal feelings, we invite chaos. Where does it end? Every being in this galaxy comes from a culture with practices that others might find uncomfortable. We tolerate and respect those differences because the alternative is conflict. She sat down and the chamber buzzed with murmured conversations. Several representatives nodded in agreement. The Velkari delegation looked satisfied. Justice Kwan turned to Taiman's side. Captain Unji, you may present your defense. Yunji stood, and immediately the tone in the room shifted. She had commanded soldiers in combat. She knew how to hold attention. High Matron Sekthar speaks of cultural autonomy, but let us be clear about what we are really discussing. We are talking about whether sentient beings have the right to live. She activated her own holographic display. The Galactic Charter, which every species in this chamber has signed, includes protections for sentient life. Article 7 states that all sentient beings possess inherent dignity and worth. Article 12 prohibits the killing of sentient beings based on genetic characteristics. The hatchling is not yet sentient, one of the Velkari representatives objected. Sentience develops over time in our species. Dr. Jiwan, would you address that claim? Yunji said. Jiwan stood and presented her medical scans of Velshir. These readings were taken when Velshir was first brought to my medical bay. Even as a newly hatched infant, he displayed brain activity consistent with basic sentience. Self-awareness, response to stimuli, evidence of thought processes. By any medical definition, he was and is a sentient being. Dayun went next, presenting her historical research. The ancient images of Lightbringers appeared on the displays. The Velkari Breeding Council claims their practice is traditional, but my research shows it is relatively recent. For most of Velkari history, albino members were valued and respected. The current practice was instituted 900 years ago for political reasons, not genetic ones. She showed genetic analysis. Modern testing reveals that albino Velkari do not suffer from the defects the council claims. Yes, they have different traits. Different does not mean defective. In fact, evidence suggests enhanced cognitive abilities that could benefit Velkari society greatly. The tribunal judges studied the presented evidence carefully. Justice Kwan made notes on her datapad. The Matharian judge's crystalline face reflected the light in unreadable patterns. The Torvan judge's multiple eyes blinked independently. Then Sekthar stood again. These humans present ancient history as if it were fact, but they misunderstand our culture. The Lightbringers were not eliminated because we feared their abilities. They were eliminated because they were unstable. Their enhanced empathy made them vulnerable to psychological collapse. Their different brain structures led to madness. We changed our practices to protect our people from suffering. That is a lie, a voice said clearly. Everyone turned. Velshir had stood up. He was smaller than most beings in the chamber, but he held himself with quiet dignity. His white scales seemed to glow under the lights. You may not speak, Sekthar said sharply. You are not recognized by this tribunal. Actually, Justice Kwan said slowly, the subject of the dispute has the right to address the chamber if they wish. Velshir, you may speak. Velshir stepped forward into the center of the floor. His voice was halting, the words shaped carefully around his Velkari vocal structure, but clear enough to understand. I am albino. I am alive. I think, I feel. I learn. He looked directly at Sekthar. You say I am defective, but I solve problems. I understand machines. I learn languages. Taiman teaches me mathematics and I understand. Dr. Jiwan teaches me biology and I remember. Dayun teaches me history and I know now what was taken from my people. Velshir's pale blue eyes swept across the chamber. You ask if I have right to live. I ask if my life has value now. Did it not have value then? When I was dying in the desert, was I less than I am now? Or was I simply not given the chance to show what I could become? The chamber fell silent. Even Sekthar seemed momentarily at a loss for words. You speak of tradition, Velshir continued. But tradition built on fear and lies is not worth keeping. I am not mad. I am not unstable. I am different, yes. But different can be valuable. Different can bring new ideas. Different can bridge gaps between those who are too similar to see beyond their own ways. He turned to face the judges. I ask this tribunal to consider, how many others like me died without being given a chance? How many potential scientists, artists, teachers, and thinkers were left in the desert because tradition said they were worthless? And if you allow this practice to continue, how many more will die? Velshir returned to his seat beside Taimin. The human placed a hand on the young Velkari's shoulder, pride evident in his expression. Justice Kwan looked at her fellow judges. They conferred quietly for several minutes. Finally, she addressed the chamber. This tribunal will recess to consider the evidence and arguments. We will reconvene in 1 hour with our decision. The wait was agony. Taman and his group sat in a small room outside the chamber. No one spoke much. Velshir sat calmly, his hands folded in his lap, seeming more at peace than any of them. When they were called back, the chamber was packed. Word had spread throughout the station. This was a case that would set precedent one way or another. Justice Kwan stood. This tribunal has reached a decision. In the matter of the Velkari Breeding Council versus Taimin, we find in favor of the defendant. Relief flooded through Taimin. Beside him, Velshir remained calm, but his hand found Taman's and squeezed gently. Furthermore, Justice Kwan continued, we establish what shall be known as the compassion precedent. When cultural practices involve the ending of sentient life, individuals from other species may intervene without legal penalty. This does not compel species to change their practices, but it protects those who choose to act on moral conscience. Sekthar stood, her expression furious. You overstep your authority. You cannot dictate Velkari culture. We do not dictate your culture. The Matharian judge spoke for the first time, its voice like wind chimes. You may continue your practices if you choose, but you cannot punish others for choosing differently. The Velkari delegation left the chamber in angry silence, but not all Velkari present left with them. A few remained, watching Velshir with expressions that might have been hope. 3 years after the tribunal, Taiman sat in his transport watching the stars drift by outside the viewport. The ship was different now. Bigger, better equipped, designed for longer journeys and more complex missions. It was no longer just a cargo hauler. It was something more. Velshir moved through the main cabin with practiced grace. He was fully grown now, standing nearly 2 meters tall. His white scales had developed intricate patterns that seemed to shift in different lights, creating effects like oil on water. His pale blue eyes missed nothing as he reviewed data on multiple screens simultaneously. We have 3 requests for assistance, Velshir reported. His human speech was nearly perfect now, with only the slightest hiss on certain consonants. One from the Meridian colony. A dispute between humans and the Kethrol over mining rights. They believe our mediation skills could help. And the others? Taman asked. A family emergency on Station Kepler. A mixed-species couple facing legal challenges regarding their children's citizenship. And a message from someone named Teklira. Tamin sat up straighter. Teklira? That is a Velkari name. Yes. The message is marked urgent and private. Velshir transferred the file to Tamin's personal screen. Tamin opened it and read quickly. His expression shifted from surprise to concern. She is High Matron Sekthar's granddaughter, a member of the Breeding Council. What does she want? Help, she has an albino hatchling. She is asking if we can come. Velshir was quiet for a moment. Then he said, of course we will go. Send her the coordinates for a secure meeting location. The transformation over 3 years had been remarkable. After the tribunal, everything changed. Tamin and Velshir had become symbols of something larger than themselves. They represented the idea that compassion could transcend species barriers, that different cultures could learn from each other instead of fearing difference. They had formed an organization. It started small, just the 2 of them offering mediation services. Then Captain Yunji joined, bringing military discipline and political connections. Dr. Jiwan contributed medical expertise. Dayan provided research and historical context. Others joined over time, both human and alien, all committed to the same principle, that bridges could be built between worlds through understanding and mutual respect. But the most significant development involved other albino Velkari. Velshir had found them. Using the resources and attention that came from the tribunal victory, he had searched for others like himself, hidden away, raised in secret by parents who could not follow through with abandonment, living in shadows never acknowledged by their own people. He had gathered 13 of them. 13 albino Velkari, ranging from young hatchlings to adults nearly Velshir's age. He had brought them together, created a community, taught them about their heritage and their potential. The hidden compound was located on a remote moon, a place where they could live openly without fear. Taman visited often. Walking among the albino Velkari was like stepping into the ancient images Daun had shown them years ago. These beings were remarkable. Their minds worked differently, making connections others missed. Their empathy allowed them to understand emotional nuances that facilitated communication and conflict resolution. They were everything the old Lightbringers had been, and more. Hyunwoo, Taemin's old dispatcher, had also changed. The cynical man who once questioned Taemin's decision now ran an underground network. When Valkyrie parents discovered they had albino hatchlings, Hyunwoo's network quietly contacted them, offered resources, provided safe transport, connected them with the hidden compound. The breeding councils knew, of course. They had to know. But they maintained public silence. Officially, albino hatchlings were still abandoned according to tradition. Unofficially, more and more of them were surviving. The old ways were dying, slowly but inevitably. Now, meeting Teklira in a private docking bay on a neutral station, Taemin understood how far things had truly come. She arrived alone, wearing a simple cloak instead of council robes. In her arms, wrapped in thermal blankets, was a tiny albino hatchling. Its scales were even whiter than Velshir's had been, almost luminescent. "I did not know where else to turn," Teklira said quietly. Her voice carried the accent of old Valkyrie nobility. "My grandmother would kill me if she knew I contacted you. But when I saw my hatchling's scales, when I looked into those pale eyes, I could not do what tradition demanded." Velshir approached slowly, his movements gentle and non-threatening. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the hatchling. Teklira hesitated, then nodded. Velshir took the small bundle carefully, cradling it against his chest. The hatchling's eyes opened, those distinctive pale blue orbs focusing on Velshir's face. A moment of recognition passed between them, one albino seeing another, separated by years but connected by shared experience. "What is her name?" Velshir asked. "I have not named her. We do not name those we abandon." Teklira's voice cracked. "But if I could name her, I would call her Shira. It means light in the old language." "Shira," Velshir repeated softly. The hatchling chirped, responding to the sound. "She's healthy, strong. She will thrive if given the chance." "Can you take her?" Teklira asked. "Can you give her the life she deserves?" "We can," Taemin said. "But you should know what you are giving up. Once you do this, once you choose this path, you cannot go back. The council will know you violated tradition." "I know." Teklira stood straighter. "But I have been thinking about this ever since your tribunal. I watched the broadcasts. I heard Velshir speak. I saw proof that everything we have been taught is wrong. And I realized that tradition built on lies is not worth preserving." She looked at her daughter, held carefully in Velshir's arms. "I want to know she is safe. I want to know she will grow up valued and loved. If I must lose my position on the council for that, so be it." "You do not have to lose her," Velshir said. "You can visit. The compound welcomes all who come in peace, and perhaps someday you might even join us there." Teklira's eyes widened. "A council member living among albinos? That would be revolutionary," Taemin supplied. "Yes, but sometimes revolution is necessary." 3 months later, Taemin found himself back at Outpost Delta 9, the place where everything began. Captain Unji had called him there for a special occasion. In the main plaza, workers were installing a memorial plaque. It was simple black stone with white lettering. The inscription read, "He stopped." That was enough. Below it, visible only under specific light wavelengths that Valkyrie could perceive, was a second line in thermal script: "The first who saw us is worthy." The Galactic Council approved the Taemin Doctrine last week, Yunji told him. "Formal protections for vulnerable individuals across all species. Your case became the foundation for actual legal reform." Taemin shook his head. "I just stopped to help." "That is all." "That is never all," Velshir said, joining them. Little Shira rode on his shoulders, her white scales gleaming in the sun. She was growing quickly, already showing the intelligence that marked Albino Valkyrie. Every great change starts with one person choosing to act. In the distance, other Albino Valkyrie moved through the outpost. Some were students, learning trades and professions. Others were teachers, sharing knowledge. A few were diplomats in training, preparing to represent their kind in galactic forums. The breeding councils still existed. They still preached their old doctrines. But fewer and fewer parents listened. Each saved hatchling represented hope. Each adult albino who thrived proved the old ways wrong. Teklira had indeed joined the compound, bringing with her 3 other council members who had secretly questioned tradition. Together they were writing new guidelines, preparing for a day when they might return to Velkari worlds and institute change from within. What now? Unji asked Taemin. You have transformed galactic law, saved countless lives, and started a movement. What does someone do after that? Taemin smiled. The same thing I have always done. I keep driving. I keep looking for people who need help. I stop when I see suffering. The human way, Velshir said with affection. No, Taemin corrected gently. Not just human. This is what any decent being should do, regardless of species. Humans just tend to be stubborn about it. A message came through on Taemin's communicator. Another request for help. A different world, a different crisis, but the same basic need. Someone who would care enough to act. Taemin looked at Velshir. Ready to go? Always, Velshir replied. They walked back to their transport together, the albino Velkari and the human who had refused to look away. Behind them, the memorial plaque caught the light, its simple message visible to all who passed. He stopped. That was enough. But it was never just about stopping. It was about what came after. It was about building bridges where others saw only divides. It was about choosing compassion over convenience, justice over tradition, and hope over despair. It was about being human in the best sense of the word. The transport lifted off, carrying them toward the next crisis, the next opportunity to help. In the cargo bay, young Shira practiced her mathematics while other albino Velkari studied various subjects. The ship that had once hauled simple cargo now carried something far more precious: the future. Below them, Thalos 7's red dust glowed in the twin suns. Somewhere out there, near the Velkari breeding compound, was the spot where Taemin had first found a dying hatchling. It looked the same as it always had, just red dust and harsh sunlight. But everything had changed. One person stopped. One life was saved. And from that single act of compassion, a new possibility had emerged. Not just for Velkari, not just for humans, but for all species willing to look beyond tradition and see the value in every individual life. The transport accelerated, leaving Thalos 7 behind. Ahead lay infinite stars and infinite possibilities. And somewhere out there, another being might need help. When that moment came, Taemin would stop. Because that was enough, and from enough, miracles could grow.